The courthouse loomed over the small town like a silent sentinel, its tall, imposing doors carved from dark oak and polished to a shine that reflected the morning sun. Emily's tiny hand was already clammy in her mother's grip as they climbed the shallow steps. For a 3-year-old, the building seemed enormous, almost as if it belonged in a fairy tale, but this was no storybook. It smelled of polished wood, old leather, and a faint tang of antiseptic that made Emily wrinkle her nose. Her mother, Claire, adjusted Emily's little cardigan, whispered words of reassurance, and tried to keep her calm. Inside, the courtroom was a mix of tension and routine. Journalists with cameras and microphones had already taken their places near the back. Their lenses trained on the elevated bench where Judge Henderson, a stern man with a reputation for meticulous fairness, would preside. The walls were lined with spectators in neatly pressed clothing, some fidgeting in uncomfortable seats, others whispering in hushed tones about the trial that had gripped the town for weeks. The air was thick with anticipation. Even the judge's robe seemed heavier than usual, as if it bore the weight of history. Emily's wide eyes darted from one detail to another. She noticed the jury seated in their designated box, adults with serious faces, hands clasped, some nervously tapping pens against their knees. She watched the defense attorney, a tall man with dark hair combed meticulously back, mutter instructions to his client, and the prosecutor, who shuffled papers with a purposeful rhythm, trying to project confidence while his jaw tensed in barely contained frustration. Every sound, the rustle of papers, the soft creak of chairs, the low murmur of whispered conversations was magnified to Emily, to her. It all felt like a maze of adults performing a ritual she only partially understood. Her gaze eventually settled on something, or rather, someone different. A large black police dog sitting beside its handler near the judge's bench. The dog was impossibly still, ears perked, eyes scanning the room with a calm intensity that made it seem almost larger than life. Emily's small fingers twitched as she instinctively pointed. "Dog," she whispered, barely audible to anyone but her mother. Claire bent down and smiled, smoothing Emily's hair. "Yes, honey, that's a police dog," she said softly, unaware that her daughter's innocent observation was about to trigger a chain of events no one could have predicted. The moment stretched, an invisible pause in the rhythm of the courtroom. Emily, sensing her mother's subtle reassurance, felt a small surge of bravery. She straightened, tiny shoulders back, and pointed more deliberately. The dog's head tilted ever so slightly, as though acknowledging her gesture. Emily's lips parted, and she whispered 2 words that would soon ripple through the room like a thunderclap. "Bad dog," she said, her voice small yet unwavering. The room froze. The judge blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Attorneys exchanged incredulous glances. Some of the spectators leaned forward, puzzled. A low murmur of surprise began, spreading like wildfire, as people tried to reconcile the innocence of the 3-year-old with the authority of the police presence. The dog remained calm but alert, ears flicking in response to Emily's voice. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Claire's hand tightened around Emily's as she whispered, "It's okay, sweetie," though even she felt a prickle of unease at the sudden attention. The police officer kneeling beside the dog exchanged a glance with his partner, a silent question hanging in the air. Had the child truly perceived something that adults had overlooked? The courtroom's atmosphere shifted subtly, the tension amplifying as curiosity and concern intertwined. Journalists, sensing a story that could not be ignored, raised their cameras. The judge cleared his throat, his voice calm, but edged with authority. "Miss Emily," he said, leaning forward slightly, "would you repeat what you just said for the record?" Emily, emboldened by the gentle encouragement, repeated the words, clear and precise. "Bad dog?" Whispers rippled across the courtroom. Some adults chuckled nervously, assuming the child was frightened or confused. Others glanced at the dog, scanning for signs of misbehavior or threat. The officers straightened, suddenly attentive. The handler's hand hovered subtly near the leash, trained instincts alert to even the faintest tension. Emily's eyes remained locked on the animal, unblinking, unwavering. Something deep within her perception had triggered a recognition. Adults couldn't yet understand a child's intuition against the backdrop of formal authority. The judge leaned back slightly, fingers steepled under his chin as he processed the situation. The attorneys whispered among themselves, their professional composure strained. The prosecutor's confident posture faltered. The defense attorney's expression hardened, masking a flicker of unease. No one could deny the shift in energy. A 3-year-old girl had altered the dynamics of a courtroom with 2 words. Emily, sensing the attention but not fully grasping it, took a tiny step forward. Her mother's hand remained firm around hers, but she allowed the movement, trusting her daughter's instincts. The dog's posture shifted slightly, tail low but tension in its muscles betraying awareness. Emily's eyes were wide, unafraid, observing the creature that adults had treated with trained respect. Unaware that her small voice had sparked a ripple in the legal proceedings that would soon grow into a wave. In the gallery, spectators whispered, leaning toward each other. "Did she just?" One muttered. Another shook her head, eyes fixed on Emily's tiny figure. Cameras clicked, recording every second. Social media, had it been live, would have exploded in real time. The story was unfolding live. A toddler, a police dog, and the start of an event no one could have predicted. Even outside the immediate courtroom, the energy was palpable. Courthouse staff paused in their work, glancing toward the central chamber with quiet curiosity. Law enforcement officers, trained to recognize danger and cues, felt the hairs on the back of their necks rise. This was not simply a child speaking. There was a weight, a precision, to her observation that demanded acknowledgement. Emily's 2 words had become a fulcrum, tilting the room from ordinary proceedings into something extraordinary. Every adult, from the judge to the jurors, the attorneys to the spectators, sensed it. And while Emily remained blissfully unaware of the magnitude, her instincts had quietly begun the unraveling of a truth long hidden. The courtroom was alive with tension, curiosity, and the quiet hum of anticipation. And at the center, Emily pointed, whispered, and stared. The dog, still and silent, responded in subtle ways no one yet fully understood. Justice, in its most unpredictable form, had just taken its first breath, all because a 3-year-old had chosen to speak. The courtroom remained suspended in disbelief. Emily's words, "mad dog," had cut through the formalities, the legal jargon, the hum of whispered conversations. For a moment, every adult present, judges, attorneys, jurors, and spectators alike paused, as if acknowledging that the smallest voice in the room had interrupted the rhythm of justice. The judge's pen hovered over his notes, the prosecutor froze mid-sentence, and the defense attorney's eyes narrowed, his mind racing for ways to regain control. Even the clerks, normally methodical and unflappable, glanced at one another, uncertain whether to proceed. Emily, unaware of the tension she had sparked, tugged gently on her mother's hand. "Dog," she repeated, pointing toward the police canine with an innocent determination. The dog's ears twitched. Its eyes, dark and alert, scanned the room, settling briefly on Emily. There was an understanding in the animal's gaze that seemed almost supernatural, a silent acknowledgement of the child's observation. The officers, trained in reading canine behavior, exchanged silent, almost imperceptible glances. The dog's body language suggested alertness and discomfort, subtle but unmistakable. Something was not right. The judge leaned forward, his voice calm yet carrying authority. "Miss Emily," he said, carefully enunciating each word as if speaking to a delicate instrument, Would you say what you just said again for the record? Emily's lips parted, and she repeated her 2 words, clear, deliberate, and unafraid. Bad dog. The room erupted into a murmur that rippled like waves across the polished wood floor. Spectators whispered, trying to make sense of the scene. A few journalists chuckled, assuming the child was frightened, but most leaned forward, recording her tiny voice on cameras and phones. The jury, previously focused on dense legal documents and expert testimony, turned their attention to the child. Their collective expressions shifted from curiosity to intrigue. Something intangible had just pierced the veil of their routine observation. The defense attorney whispered urgently to his client, "Stay calm. It's just a child. It doesn't affect anything." But the man's pale face betrayed rising panic. His carefully constructed narrative, the alibi, the witnesses, the carefully timed events, now faced an unexpected, unquantifiable challenge. A 3-year-old's instinct, pure and unfiltered, had intruded into a courtroom designed to measure truth with meticulous precision. The attorney's reassurances felt hollow, even to him. The police officer, standing beside the dog, knelt slightly, his hand near the leash, but not touching. "Good boy," he murmured quietly, though his eyes never left Emily. He understood instinct. He respected it. The dog's low growl, barely audible but sharp in its intent, confirmed the officer's intuition. The child's observation was more than random fear. Something in the room triggered the dog's alertness. Something humans had overlooked. Emily's mother, Claire, whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. You're fine." She adjusted Emily's cardigan, gently brushing stray hair from her forehead. Yet even as she comforted her daughter, she felt a knot in her stomach. Something about Emily's focus, the certainty in her eyes, the unwavering direction of her tiny finger, it was more than childlike curiosity. Claire realized, with a mixture of awe and apprehension, that her daughter had perceived something critical. The prosecutor straightened, adjusting his tie with a subtle but nervous movement. "Your Honor," he said, clearing his throat, "perhaps we should allow the officers to address this." "Observation?" His voice wavered slightly, betraying the shift in confidence. He had prepared meticulously, but now the trial had taken an unpredictable turn. The room, previously a place of procedural predictability, became charged with a new energy. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the dog, the handler, and the tiny observer who had spoken 2 simple words. The judge nodded slowly, signaling the officer. "Officer, if you would," he said, his voice measured. "Explain the situation to the court." The officer, trained to remain calm, stood, his eyes sweeping the courtroom. "Your Honor, the canine assigned to this case is trained in detection, protection, and behavioral observation. It responds to sense, unusual movements, and subtle cues in human behavior. While the child's comment may seem simple, the dog's reaction to her attention indicates that something unusual is occurring near the area she has indicated. We recommend a careful inspection before proceeding with further testimony." A low murmur swept through the courtroom. Spectators leaned forward. Cameras clicked. Journalists whispered into microphones, and the jury exchanged glances, their interest now fully captured. Even seasoned lawyers felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Emily, standing on tiptoe, pointed with conviction, unaware that her instincts had drawn attention to a potential turning point in the trial. The defense attorney rose, a faint tremor in his hand, betraying his effort to remain composed. "Your Honor," he said carefully, "this is a distraction. A child cannot dictate the proceedings of this court. We should proceed according to the evidence presented, not the whims of a toddler." The judge raised a hand, signaling for silence. "I understand your objection," he said firmly. However, the officer's statement regarding the dog's detection is relevant and may impact the handling of evidence. Court procedure requires all potential threats or anomalies to be addressed before continuing. The court will take a brief recess while officers investigate the indicated area. A palpable tension settled over the room as the officer and the dog moved toward the location Emily had indicated. The child's eyes never left the canine, her small form a beacon of curiosity and precision. Claire held her breath, her mind racing. Emily's ability to notice, to observe, to act even without understanding the gravity of the moment was extraordinary. The dog's movements were careful, precise, and trained. Its nose twitched as it scanned the floor near a chair at the edge of the courtroom. The officer followed closely, noting the subtle cues that only trained handlers could detect. Emily's tiny finger remained extended, unwavering. Whispered commentary filled the room as people speculated on what might be hidden. An overlooked piece of evidence, an unusual scent, a discrepancy previously unnoticed. Minutes felt like hours. Every spectator leaned forward, phones and cameras ready. Even journalists, accustomed to sensational stories, found themselves holding their breath. Emily's simple words had transformed a procedural day in court into a moment of collective suspense. The dog paused, paw slightly raised, ears forward. It had detected something. The officer nodded subtly, signaling to colleagues. The air was electric, filled with anticipation. Claire whispered softly to Emily, "Sweetheart, look at you." Emily tilted her head slightly, as if acknowledging the praise without fully understanding it. Her innocence contrasted sharply with the high-stakes tension around her. The courtroom, once orderly and formal, now buzzed with the quiet thrill of impending discovery. Emily's 2 words had become a catalyst, setting in motion a sequence that could alter the course of the trial. And as the officer's hand reached down to retrieve what lay hidden near the chair, the room held its collective breath. The smallest observer had spoken, the dog had responded, and the adults waited wondering what truth had been uncovered by the perception of a 3-year-old child. The officer's hand hovered above the floor, just inches from the polished wooden surface, while the dog's nose twitched rapidly. Emily's tiny finger remained fixed, unwavering, a pointer to a truth no adult had yet realized. Every eye in the courtroom was glued to the trio, the officer, the dog, and the small child whose instinct had drawn them here. A tense silence blanketed the room. Not even the shuffling of papers or the quiet clicking of cameras disturbed the hush. People leaned forward, collectively holding their breath, waiting for what the dog would uncover. The dog's body stiffened, low growl vibrating in its chest. Its ears pinned back slightly, tail lowering in controlled tension, every movement meticulous and deliberate. It wasn't aggression. It was recognition. The canine had sensed something, a foreign presence or an anomaly, a scent or object that didn't belong. Its training told it to alert, to investigate, but only subtly, without panic. And subtly, it had alerted. The officer's eyes narrowed, reading every cue with a practiced precision developed over years of service. Emily's innocent observation had become a trigger, activating the dog's instincts in ways humans could barely interpret. The judge leaned forward in his seat, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. "Officer," he said, voice measured but commanding, "please proceed with caution." His words carried authority, yet even he seemed intrigued, almost reluctant to break the suspense. Every attorney, juror, and spectator watched in rapt attention. Cameras clicked, journalists whispered quietly into microphones, their recording devices capturing every heartbeat of the unfolding scene. It was no longer a trial. It was theater, suspense threaded through reality. With deliberate care, the officer bent low, letting the dog move forward first. Its paws made almost no sound on the polished wood, a quiet whisper of movement that carried weight far beyond its size. The dog's nose hovered above the floor, sniffing the air and scanning for anomalies. Then, almost imperceptibly, it froze. Its gaze locked onto a shadow beneath a chair at the edge of the courtroom, a corner that had been overlooked by everyone. The low growl that emerged was subtle but unmistakable, vibrating through the air with a sense of warning. Emily's eyes lit up. Her tiny body stiffened as if she understood that her instinct had been correct. "There," she whispered, repeating her earlier declaration. Her mother's hand tightened around hers, both pride and apprehension mingling in her chest. Claire's heart raced. Emily, just a toddler, had done what seasoned professionals and trained lawyers had not. She had noticed a detail critical to the integrity of the trial. The dog's handler knelt low, carefully observing every twitch, every movement of the canine. "Hold still, boy," he murmured softly, voice barely audible. The dog shifted slightly, adjusting its stance, signaling awareness of a scent not yet visible to the human eye. Officer Matthews, veteran of countless cases, exchanged a glance with his partner. He had seen dogs detect threats, evidence, and dangers that humans missed, but rarely had he witnessed such a precise correlation between a child's observation and a trained canine's instinct. Then the officer acted. With slow, deliberate movements, he reached beneath the chair, his hand brushing against the floor. The dog's growl deepened slightly, tail stiffening further. A small, nondescript bag came into view, partially hidden beneath the polished wood. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Spectators leaned forward, journalists scrambled to record, and even the jurors' jaws tightened with a mix of surprise and anticipation. The defense attorney's face paled, lips pressing into a thin line as he realized that the bag could undermine everything. The officer lifted the bag, holding it carefully for inspection. Emily, unaware of the gravity of her discovery, smiled at the dog as if sharing a private triumph. "Good boy," she said softly, her tiny voice full of innocent approval. The canine's head tilted, acknowledging the praise, while the room collectively held its breath. The judge, leaning forward, motioned for silence. "Let the record reflect that evidence has been located as a result of canine detection and a child's observation," he said solemnly. The gravity of the statement settled over the room like a heavy cloak. Detectives and forensic experts quickly moved in, examining the contents of the bag with gloved hands. Inside, they found a personal item, a small, easily overlooked object that directly linked the defendant to the crime. The room buzzed with disbelief. Journalists whispered into their microphones, capturing the surreal nature of the moment. The jury exchanged glances, their deliberative minds racing. How could a toddler, who had not yet mastered complex reasoning, reveal such a crucial clue? The answer was instinct pure, unfiltered, and undeniable. The defense attorney rose, voice trembling despite attempts to maintain composure. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child cannot be relied upon to influence the proceedings of this court. We request that this evidence be disregarded." His argument was procedural, formal, and carefully structured, but it faltered in the face of what had just occurred. The room's attention lingered on Emily and the dog. The intuitive connection they had demonstrated was undeniable to every observer. The prosecutor, on the other hand, allowed a subtle nod. "Your Honor, the canine's detection has been verified, and the evidence recovered directly correlates with the suspect. While the child's observation was incidental, it cannot be dismissed. It guided law enforcement to the location of critical material." His words, measured and professional, carried weight in the chamber. The judge's expression remained calm, yet a flicker of surprise passed over his eyes. He had presided over countless trials, but few had unfolded in a manner so unconventional, so reliant on instinct rather than formal testimony. Emily, still clutching her mother's hand, felt a mixture of pride and curiosity. She tilted her head, watching the dog with a sense of wonder. Its obedience, its awareness, and its quiet confidence fascinated her. For Emily, it was a moment of connection, a silent understanding between child and canine, a partnership she could not yet articulate in words. The court, however, recognized the significance. A trial that had seemed predictable, measured, and procedural had now been transformed into a living narrative of suspense, instinct, and revelation. Spectators whispered among themselves, murmuring about the extraordinary scene. "Did you see that?" one asked. A child and a dog found evidence no one else noticed. The courtroom, usually a place of rigid procedure, had become charged with a shared sense of awe. Cameras clicked relentlessly, recording the scene for history. The judge motioned for the courtroom to return to order, but the energy lingered like electricity in the air. Emily's 2 words, so small, so unassuming, had altered the course of the trial. The officer carefully handed the bag to a forensic technician, who examined it under bright lights. Every movement was deliberate, controlled, and professional. The dog remained alert, ears pricked, tail low but tense, as if it understood that the moment had significance beyond its training. Emily giggled softly, a sound that contrasted sharply with the tension-filled chamber. Her innocence had unveiled a truth no adult had yet seen. Her words, her observation, had become a fulcrum upon which justice now teetered. The judge called for a short recess, allowing officers and forensic experts to analyze the evidence further. Lawyers whispered among themselves, recalculating strategies. Spectators filed out into the hall, buzzing with speculation. Journalists rushed to transmit updates, their voices tinged with excitement. And in the center of it all, Emily stood, small but triumphant, beside the alert police dog who had confirmed her insight. In that moment, the courtroom bore witness to something extraordinary, the convergence of innocence, instinct, and training. A 3-year-old girl's keen observation had triggered a sequence of events that revealed hidden evidence, altered perceptions, and shifted the balance of the trial. It was a reminder, stark and undeniable, that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected voices could illuminate the greatest truths. And Emily, oblivious to her growing significance, simply pointed and whispered again, "Bad dog." Plus, the courtroom had shifted from tense anticipation to a charged mix of astonishment and disbelief. The small bag retrieved from beneath the chair had sent ripples through every corner of the room. Officers and forensic experts moved with swift precision, carefully examining the contents under bright lights. It was a seemingly innocuous item, a personal object the defendant had believed discarded, overlooked, or hidden well enough to avoid detection. Yet its presence here tied him directly to the crime, undermining the alibi that his attorney had spent weeks meticulously constructing. Every hand in the courtroom trembled slightly, whether from shock, curiosity, or a mounting sense of justice. Emily's tiny hand still clutched her mother's, her gaze fixed on the dog, whose unwavering attention seemed almost to acknowledge her silent role in this discovery. She did not fully grasp the magnitude of the moment, but instinct and pure observation had guided her to the scene. Spectators whispered among themselves, eyes darting between the dog, the child, and the officers examining the evidence. Journalists clicked cameras and scribbled notes, capturing every detail, every expression, and every reaction that marked the unfolding narrative. The tiny observer had become central to the courtroom's collective consciousness. The judge, usually unflappable, leaned forward, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Let the record reflect that new evidence has been recovered, directly linked to the case," he said, his voice calm, yet commanding. He glanced briefly at the child, Emily, and then at the dog, and that it was located as a result of canine detection and a minor witness's observation. The words hung in the air, heavy with significance. Every adult in the room, understood the rarity of what had just transpired. A 3-year-old had altered the procedural flow of a high-stakes trial with 2 small words. For the defendant, the revelation was catastrophic. His eyes widened, sweat foaming along his temples as he realized the precarious position into which he had been thrust. The meticulous plan he had relied upon careful testimony, carefully timed alibis, and manipulated perceptions was now unraveling in real time. He shifted nervously in his chair, voice swallowed by the courtroom's low hum of disbelief. His attorney tried to mask the tremor in his hands, muttering procedural reminders, but the cracks were visible, and every juror, every spectator, could sense the uncertainty. Detectives quickly documented and bagged the recovered item, noting every detail for the official record. Its relevance was undeniable. Fingerprints, fibers, and traces of the defendant's personal belongings tied him to the crime beyond circumstantial doubt. The courtroom buzzed with speculation. People whispered to each other, eyes wide, commenting on the uncanny chain of events that led to the discovery. Social media would have been ablaze if cameras could instantly transmit. The story of a child and a police dog uncovering critical evidence had captured the collective imagination of anyone witnessing it. Emily's mother, Claire, could not suppress a small shiver of awe. She knelt slightly, brushing Emily's hair back from her face. "You see, honey," she whispered softly. "Sometimes noticing small things can make a big difference." Emily tilted her head, absorbing the praise, but mostly fascinated by the dog whose calm, attentive presence had guided the discovery. The canine, for its part, remained perfectly still, obedient, yet clearly aware of the significance of the moment. It had fulfilled its training, but it had also responded to instinct and Emily's subtle guidance, an unlikely partnership that had achieved the extraordinary. The defense attorney rose to object, his voice slightly louder than before, though now tinged with desperation. "Your Honor, I must insist that this so-called evidence be considered inadmissible. It was discovered by chance, influenced by a minor who is not a trained witness. The chain of custody and procedural integrity cannot be compromised by the whim of a toddler." His words, carefully chosen, carried the authority of the law, but in the courtroom, authority did not erase the visible impact of what had occurred. Every eye shifted between Emily, the dog, and the officers who had confirmed the evidence's authenticity. The prosecutor countered calmly, yet with undeniable conviction. "Your Honor, while the child's observation may appear incidental, it led directly to the discovery of material evidence central to the case. The canine's training and detection are verified, and the item recovered matches forensic criteria, establishing its connection to the defendant. A child's identification merely provided guidance, which does not diminish the validity or relevance of the evidence." His measured words resonated, particularly with the jurors, who now had a tangible object, a concrete clue, that reinforced the narrative of guilt. Throughout the courtroom, the energy shifted. The spectators leaned forward in their seats, murmuring quietly. Cameras clicked relentlessly. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves caught in the tension, their focus unyielding. The narrative had changed. What had started as an ordinary day of legal procedure had become an extraordinary tale of intuition, observation, and cooperation between human and canine. The smallest participants, the 3-year-old, and the police dog were now at the center of a high-stakes legal drama that no one could have predicted. The judge cleared his throat, calling for order. "All persons in the courtroom are reminded that proceedings are ongoing," he said, voice steady. He then signaled the forensic officers to continue their inspection. "Let the record reflect that all items recovered will be examined and properly documented. Proceedings will resume after verification." His words imposed calm, yet the courtroom hummed with quiet excitement. Everyone understood that they had witnessed an extraordinary intersection of innocence, instinct, and law. Emily, standing still beside her mother, continued to watch the dog. She extended her hand slightly, as though to signal praise or solidarity. The canine tilted its head, responding with subtle acknowledgement. This quiet moment, unnoticed by the majority, reflected the core of the incident. A child's perception guided the trained instincts of a police dog, revealing evidence that had eluded seasoned professionals. It was a reminder of the unpredictability of human intuition and the power of attentiveness, regardless of age. The defense attorney slumped slightly in his chair, recognizing that the courtroom had shifted against him. The defendant's nervous glances were increasingly frantic, his carefully rehearsed explanations now inadequate. Jurors exchanged subtle glances, their focus sharpened on the tangible evidence and the unusual, yet compelling, circumstances surrounding its discovery. The trial was no longer simply about testimony and documents. It was about perception, instinct, and the surprising ways in which truth can reveal itself. As the forensic team completed its initial inspection, a murmured acknowledgement passed through the courtroom. The evidence was real, its connection to the defendant undeniable. Cameras captured every moment, documenting what had become an unprecedented courtroom occurrence. A toddler's words had guided a dog to uncover a clue critical to justice. Emily's tiny voice had shifted the momentum, transforming speculation into concrete fact. The room held a collective awareness that justice, in this instance, had been served not solely by trained adults, but by the synergy of instinct, innocence, and disciplined canine behavior. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing experts to examine the evidence more thoroughly. Spectators and journalists filed out into the hall, buzzing with conversation and speculation. Emily remained at the center of the courtroom, small but radiant, her two words echoing in the minds of everyone present. She had unwittingly become a symbol of truth, courage, and the unexpected power of observation. The dog sat obediently, its calm presence a silent testament to the unique partnership that had just altered the trajectory of a high-profile trial. Even as the courtroom emptied, whispers and stunned commentary lingered in the air. Emily's two words simple, unassuming, innocent had catalyzed the discovery of crucial evidence and changed the dynamic of the case forever. The trial, once predictable and methodical, now bristled with suspense and uncertainty. And through it all, a 3-year-old girl and a police dog had proven that sometimes the smallest, most unexpected witnesses hold the greatest power to reveal the truth. By the time news of the courtroom incident reached the city streets, Emily's story had already captured imaginations far beyond the courthouse walls. Local television crews scrambled to broadcast footage of the tiny girl pointing confidently at the police dog, her small voice pronouncing two words that had altered the course of a high-profile trial: bad dog. The clip circulated rapidly online, with hashtags trending within hours. Hashtag toddler detective, hashtag bad dog hero, and hashtag courtroom miracle. Social media erupted in debates, awe, and admiration. News anchors replayed the moment repeatedly, marveling at the improbable precision of a 3-year-old in a formal legal setting. Residents of the small town gathered in front of the courthouse, craning their necks to glimpse the now famous duo. Emily, a bright-eyed toddler in a simple cardigan, and the alert, disciplined police dog whose behavior had confirmed her observation. Some whispered about fate, others about intuition. Parents clutched their children's hands, pointing to Emily as if she were a living lesson in courage and honesty. Local law enforcement officers nodded approvingly at the canine, praising its training and instincts. Yet the consensus was clear. The child had stolen the spotlight with nothing more than curiosity, bravery, and keen observation. In newsrooms across the city, analysts debated the implications of Emily's actions. Psychologists weighed in, discussing the extraordinary capacity for perception in young children. Legal experts speculated on whether this incident might influence future courtroom procedures, acknowledging the rare instance where a minor's instinct contributed meaningfully to a case. Even seasoned journalists, accustomed to sensational stories, paused to marvel at the unusual combination of innocence and insight that had shaped the trial. Emily, still unaware of the attention she had drawn, remained focused on the dog, mimicking a sense of admiration and trust that seemed almost innate. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, the courtroom itself had been transformed. Officers, detectives, and legal professionals treated Emily with a mixture of awe and caution, recognizing her inadvertent role in uncovering critical evidence. The judge, maintaining composure, issued instructions for decorum, yet even he could not suppress the subtle fascination in his eyes. Jurors, previously focused on procedural details and testimonies, found themselves captivated by the living symbol of instinct and truth before them. The child's simple declaration had introduced an unpredictable element, yet its accuracy and effect were undeniable. Emily's mother, Claire, marveled at the growing recognition. She knelt beside her daughter during breaks, brushing hair from her forehead and whispering reassurances. "Sweetheart, people are talking about how smart you are," she murmured. Emily tilted her head, absorbing the praise in her own quiet way. Her world, once limited to home and playground, had suddenly expanded into the adult-dominated realm of law, media, and public fascination. She did not yet understand the gravity of her actions. She only understood that the dog had listened and responded, that her instincts had mattered. Journalists camped outside the courthouse interviewed spectators, capturing the collective wonder. "I've never seen anything like it," said one resident, her voice quivering with excitement. A 3-year-old pointed at a dog, and it led to critical evidence being found. "It's like something out of a movie." Another remarked on the dog's calm demeanor, noting how unusual it was for a canine to maintain such focus in a crowded, chaotic environment. Together, child and dog became symbols of collaboration, intuition, and truth that transcended age, experience, or expectation. The media frenzy intensified as recordings went viral. Television anchors replayed the moment, highlighting the dramatic juxtaposition of innocence and authority. Legal analysts debated the reliability of such incidents, yet the evidence retrieved could not be denied. Editorials hailed Emily as a symbol of truth and vigilance, noting that her awareness had triggered a sequence of events resulting in justice. Across social platforms, parents shared stories of their own children noticing small details, drawing inspiration from the toddler who had altered a legal proceeding with nothing more than instinct and observation. Emily herself remained blissfully unaware of her fame. She crouched beside the dog during recesses, patting its head gently and giggling at its calm, watchful eyes. The dog responded with subtle acknowledgement, as if it understood that the small human beside it had played a pivotal role. Officers observed this interaction, marveling at the rare alignment of instincts, human and canine, recognizing and responding to shared signals in a manner that transcended traditional understanding. Emily's influence had reached beyond the courtroom. She had become a living lesson in observation, trust, and courage. Within the courtroom, the trial resumed after brief recesses, but the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Jurors now observed not only the testimonies and physical evidence, but also the lingering imprint of Emily's observation. The defendant, increasingly aware of the shifting momentum, became visibly nervous, casting furtive glances at the child and the dog. The defense attorney, aware that procedural arguments could no longer shield the client from the narrative unfolding before the jury, adopted a quieter, more defensive posture. Every word, every motion, every glance carried heightened significance. The public's fascination only grew. News outlets published interviews with Claire and Emily. Though the toddler remained largely silent, her presence more impactful than her words. Experts in child psychology commented on the extraordinary observational skills of young children, while law enforcement officials praised the unique role played by the police dog. Together, Emily and the canine became emblematic of a broader truth, that even the smallest, most unassuming participants can illuminate significant insights when circumstances align. The city buzzed with discussions of instinct, justice, and the unlikely duo whose collaboration had captured hearts and headlines alike. By the end of the day, Emily's story had traveled beyond the courthouse and social media. The narrative of a child pointing out bad dog, leading to the discovery of crucial evidence, had permeated schools, offices, and households. Parents told their children of the toddler who had unwittingly contributed to justice. Law enforcement agencies used the case as an anecdote in training sessions, illustrating the unexpected ways intuition can play a role in investigations. Emily, oblivious to her growing legend, focused only on the calm, obedient dog at her side, her 2 words echoing quietly in the minds of all who witnessed them. As evening descended, the courthouse emptied, yet the energy lingered in the minds of those present. Every officer, lawyer, juror, and spectator carried with them the memory of the improbable alliance. A 3-year-old's instinct, combined with a police dog's training, had led to a revelation no one could have anticipated. It was a reminder that truth can emerge from the most unlikely sources, that courage can be found in innocence, and that observation, even from the smallest and youngest among us, can wield extraordinary power. Emily's 2 words, simple, unassuming, profound, had become a beacon of revelation and inspiration. By the time news of the courtroom incident reached the city streets, Emily's story had already captured imaginations far beyond the courthouse walls. Local television crews scrambled to broadcast footage of the tiny girl pointing confidently at the police dog, her small voice pronouncing 2 words that had altered the course of a high-profile trial: bad dog. The clip circulated rapidly online, with hashtags trending within hours. Hashtag toddler detective, hashtag bad dog hero, and hashtag courtroom miracle. Social media erupted in debates, awe, and admiration. News anchors replayed the moment repeatedly, marveling at the improbable precision of a 3-year-old in a formal legal setting. Residents of the small town gathered in front of the courthouse, craning their necks to glimpse the now famous duo. Emily, a bright-eyed toddler in a simple cardigan, and the alert, disciplined police dog whose behavior had confirmed her observation. Some whispered about fate, others about intuition. Parents clutched their children's hands, pointing to Emily as if she were a living lesson in courage and honesty. Local law enforcement officers nodded approvingly at the canine, praising its training and instincts. Yet the consensus was clear. The child had stolen the spotlight with nothing more than curiosity, bravery, and keen observation. In newsrooms across the city, analysts debated the implications of Emily's actions. Psychologists weighed in, discussing the extraordinary capacity for perception in young children. Legal experts speculated on whether this incident might influence future courtroom procedures, acknowledging the rare instance where a minor's instinct contributed meaningfully to a case. Even seasoned journalists, accustomed to sensational stories, paused to marvel at the unusual combination of innocence and insight that had shaped the trial. Emily, still unaware of the attention she had drawn, remained focused on the dog, mimicking a sense of admiration and trust that seemed almost innate. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, the courtroom itself had been transformed. Officers, detectives, and legal professionals treated Emily with a mixture of awe and caution, recognizing her inadvertent role in uncovering critical evidence. The judge, maintaining composure, issued instructions for decorum, yet even he could not suppress the subtle fascination in his eyes. Jurors, previously focused on procedural details and testimonies, found themselves captivated by the living symbol of instinct and truth before them. The child's simple declaration had introduced an unpredictable element, yet its accuracy and effect were undeniable. Emily's mother, Claire, marveled at the growing recognition. She knelt beside her daughter during breaks, brushing hair from her forehead and whispering reassurances. "Sweetheart, people are talking about how smart you are," she murmured. Emily tilted her head, absorbing the praise in her own quiet way. Her world, once limited to home and playground, had suddenly expanded into the adult-dominated realm of law, media, and public fascination. She did not yet understand the gravity of her actions. She only understood that the dog had listened and responded, that her instincts had mattered. Journalists camped outside the courthouse interviewed spectators, capturing the collective wonder. "I've never seen anything like it," said one resident, her voice quivering with excitement. A 3-year-old pointed at a dog, and it led to critical evidence being found. "It's like something out of a movie." Another remarked on the dog's calm demeanor, noting how unusual it was for a canine to maintain such focus in a crowded, chaotic environment. Together, child and dog became symbols of collaboration, intuition, and truth that transcended age, experience, or expectation. The media frenzy intensified as recordings went viral. Television anchors replayed the moment, highlighting the dramatic juxtaposition of innocence and authority. Legal analysts debated the reliability of such incidents, yet the evidence retrieved could not be denied. Editorials hailed Emily as a symbol of truth and vigilance, noting that her awareness had triggered a sequence of events resulting in justice. Across social platforms, parents shared stories of their own children noticing small details, drawing inspiration from the toddler who had altered a legal proceeding with nothing more than instinct and observation. Emily herself remained blissfully unaware of her fame. She crouched beside the dog during recesses, patting its head gently and giggling at its calm, watchful eyes. The dog responded with subtle acknowledgement, as if it understood that the small human beside it had played a pivotal role. Officers observed this interaction, marveling at the rare alignment of instincts, human and canine, recognizing and responding to shared signals in a manner that transcended traditional understanding. Emily's influence had reached beyond the courtroom. She had become a living lesson in observation, trust, and courage. Within the courtroom, the trial resumed after brief recesses, but the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. Jurors now observed not only the testimonies and physical evidence, but also the lingering imprint of Emily's observation. The defendant, increasingly aware of the shifting momentum, became visibly nervous, casting furtive glances at the child and the dog. The defense attorney, aware that procedural arguments could no longer shield the client from the narrative unfolding before the jury, adopted a quieter, more defensive posture. Every word, every motion, every glance carried heightened significance. The public's fascination only grew. News outlets published interviews with Claire and Emily. Though the toddler remained largely silent, her presence more impactful than her words. Experts in child psychology commented on the extraordinary observational skills of young children, while law enforcement officials praised the unique role played by the police dog. Together, Emily and the canine became emblematic of a broader truth, that even the smallest, most unassuming participants can illuminate significant insights when circumstances align. The city buzzed with discussions of instinct, justice, and the unlikely duo whose collaboration had captured hearts and headlines alike. By the end of the day, Emily's story had traveled beyond the courthouse and social media. The narrative of a child pointing out bad dog, leading to the discovery of crucial evidence, had permeated schools, offices, and households. Parents told their children of the toddler who had unwittingly contributed to justice. Law enforcement agencies used the case as an anecdote in training sessions, illustrating the unexpected ways intuition, and play a role in investigations. Emily, oblivious to her growing legend, focused only on the calm, obedient dog at her side, her 2 words echoing quietly in the minds of all who witnessed them. As evening descended, the courthouse emptied, yet the energy lingered in the minds of those present. Every officer, lawyer, juror, and spectator carried with them the memory of the improbable alliance. A 3-year-old's instinct, combined with a police dog's training, had led to a revelation no one could have anticipated. It was a reminder that truth can emerge from the most unlikely sources, that courage can be found in innocence, and that observation, even from the smallest and youngest among us, can wield extraordinary power. Emily's 2 words, simple, unassuming, profound, had become a beacon of revelation and inspiration. The courtroom buzzed with a tense anticipation that had grown heavier with each passing hour. Emily's 2 words, bad dog, had transformed the trial from a methodical presentation of evidence into a drama of instinct, intuition, and unforeseen revelation. Every witness, juror, and spectator felt the weight of what had unfolded. The recovered bag, its contents directly tying the defendant to the crime, had shifted the balance of the case. The defense attorney, though skilled and composed in most circumstances, now appeared visibly unsettled, aware that his carefully constructed arguments had been undermined in a way that no procedural maneuver could reverse. The jurors filed back into the room, their expressions a mixture of focus and disbelief. They had deliberated quickly, but the case had left them grappling not only with the concrete evidence but also with the extraordinary sequence of events that had brought it to light. A 3-year-old girl's observation, confirmed by a police dog's trained instincts, had altered the course of justice in a way that few could have imagined. The room, previously dominated by legal formalities and rehearsed testimonies, now felt alive with the undercurrent of wonder and awe. The defendant slumped in his chair, his confident composure shattered. He avoided eye contact with the jury, shifting uneasily, his mind racing for an explanation or an escape route, though neither existed. The defense attorney leaned forward, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow even to him. Outside the courtroom, news crews jostled for position, eager to capture the final moments of a trial that had captivated an entire community. Cameras were trained on the entrance, the judge's bench, and the small figure of Emily, standing quietly beside the police dog. Judge Henderson adjusted his robe, tapping the gavel lightly against the desk to call the room to order. "Members of the jury," he said, voice steady and commanding, "have you reached a verdict?" There was a pause, a moment of breathless silence as the foreperson rose. The eyes of every adult in the courtroom, including the defendant and his attorney, focused on the small paper in the foreperson's hand. The murmurs subsided into a charged hush, the kind of silence that felt almost tangible. "We have," the foreperson said, voice calm but firm. "We find the defendant guilty on all charges." The words hit the room like a wave. Gasps of surprise, relief, and disbelief swept through the spectators. The defendant's face turned pale. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the arms of his chair. The defense attorney lowered his head, acknowledging the certainty in the jury's decision. Officers exchanged quiet nods, a subtle recognition of justice served. And at the center of it all, Emily remained poised, her eyes focused on the dog, unaware of the full magnitude of her contribution. The judge's gavel struck sharply against the desk, signaling the conclusion of the verdict. "The court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances that led to this outcome," Judge Henderson said. "The observation of a minor, coupled with the trained instincts of a police canine, has proven instrumental in uncovering critical evidence. Let it be recognized that justice was served through a unique collaboration of innocence, instinct, and professional diligence." His words, solemn and deliberate, echoed through the chamber, underscoring the remarkable nature of the trial's resolution. As proceedings concluded, court officers motioned for Emily to approach the bench. Claire lifted her daughter, holding her close, whispering soft encouragement. "Go ahead, baby. You did something amazing." Emily's small face broke into a tentative smile, a mixture of curiosity and pride. The judge leaned forward slightly, presenting a small certificate of recognition. "This is to acknowledge bravery, observation, and the significant role you played in assisting law enforcement during these proceedings," he said. Cameras clicked as Emily accepted the certificate, her fingers brushing the edge as though understanding, in some small way, the honor she had earned. The courtroom erupted in applause. Spectators stood, some wiping away tears, others clapping with unrestrained excitement. Officers patted the dog on the head, murmuring words of approval. The canine, loyal and disciplined, remained composed, though its eyes reflected a subtle sense of pride and acknowledgement. Emily, still clutching her mother's hand, giggled softly, tilting her head toward the dog in a gesture of camaraderie. It was a quiet moment of triumph, yet it resonated far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Journalists scrambled to capture every detail for television, social media, and print coverage. Interviews with Claire and the officers were conducted outside the courtroom. "She didn't even realize what she had done," Claire said, voice trembling with pride. "She just pointed at the dog, and everything changed." The officers nodded, highlighting the rare alignment of a child's intuition with a trained canine's professional instincts. The story resonated widely, becoming an emblem of unexpected heroism and the power of observation, even in its simplest forms. The defendant was escorted from the courtroom under close supervision. His composure had entirely crumbled, replaced by a mix of disbelief, shame, and resignation. The defense attorney followed, somber and reflective, realizing that the sequence of events would be recounted for years as a rare, almost cinematic example of justice guided by intuition. The courtroom emptied slowly, the spectators buzzing with conversation, cameras clicking, and journalists noting every gesture. Yet at the center of it all stood Emily, the unassuming hero whose instincts had uncovered truth. In the days following the trial, Emily's story spread nationwide. Newspapers, television broadcasts, and online platforms highlighted the improbable chain of events. Psychologists commented on her keen observation. Law enforcement agencies praised the collaboration with the canine, and legal analysts marveled at the rare instance in which a child's awareness directly influenced a criminal proceeding. Emily remained blissfully unaware of the fame surrounding her. For her, the excitement lay in the dog's calm presence, the gentle praise from her mother, and the certificate she clutched proudly in her small hands. The police dog, now a local hero in its own right, received commendations for its professionalism, alertness, and ability to respond to subtle cues. Officers highlighted the importance of partnership between humans and trained animals, noting that the alignment of instinct, training, and observation in this case had resulted in a successful outcome. Emily had unknowingly become a central figure in this partnership, demonstrating that the smallest participants could yield extraordinary results. Weeks later, the community gathered for a small ceremony honoring Emily and the dog. The event was filled with applause, smiles, and stories retold with dramatic flair. Children watched with wide eyes, inspired by the story of a peer whose small words and keen observation had made a tangible difference. Law enforcement officers, community leaders, and citizens spoke of courage, vigilance, and the unexpected ways justice can reveal itself. Emily, radiant in a simple dress, giggled and patted the dog's head, completely at ease in the midst of her recognition. The trial's conclusion, the verdict, and the public recognition solidified Emily and the dog as symbols of truth, observation, and courage. Their story inspired conversations about perception, the power of instinct, and the ways in which innocence could intersect meaningfully with responsibility. For the town, and indeed the nation, Emily's words, simple, precise, and unwavering, had become emblematic of the extraordinary impact a single individual could have, regardless of age. And as the sun set over the courthouse, casting long shadows through its grand windows, Emily sat beside the dog, certificate in hand, unaware of her lasting legacy. In the world of adults, the trial had ended. Justice had been served, and the media frenzy continued, but for Emily, the adventure had been simple. She had pointed, spoken, and watched as the dog responded. Yet those two words, bad dog, would echo in history, immortalized as the catalyst for a remarkable courtroom revelation.